My name is Claire. I am 34 years old, and 2 months ago, at my stepfather's retirement dinner, he stood in front of every important person in his life and told them all that I was the family's biggest mistake. And I just smiled, set down my wine glass, and walked out of that restaurant forever. But here is the part nobody saw coming. The company he had been bragging about saving his business for 3 years, that was mine. Every dollar of efficiency he took credit for, my work. And he had absolutely no idea. Let me take you back to where this really began. Growing up in Naperville, Illinois, I learned early that some kids are chosen and some kids are tolerated. I was tolerated. My mother remarried when I was 9, and overnight, everything shifted. My stepfather, Gary, was a logistics executive, polished, respected, the kind of man who got standing ovations at Chamber of Commerce dinners. He had a son from his first marriage named Derek, 2 years older than me, and from the moment they moved in, Derek was the son that everything orbited around. I was just weather. My mom did her best. I know that now. But Gary had a way of making decisions feel like gravity, like they were simply the natural order of things. Derek got the college fund conversations at dinner. I got, "You'll figure it out, Claire. You always do." Derek got the new laptop for school. I got Derek's old one with a cracked hinge. Derek's grades were celebrated. Mine were acknowledged the way you acknowledge a cloudy day, briefly and then forgotten. There was one person who refused to look through me. My grandmother on my mother's side, Ruth. She called every Sunday without fail. She asked about my classes, my friends, what I was reading, what I was dreaming. She used to say, "Claire, the ones who are overlooked are just being saved up for something bigger." I did not fully understand what she meant until years later. When I was 21, junior year at the University of Illinois, business major, 3.7 GPA, I got a call from my mother asking me to come home for a family meeting. Those 2 words had never once meant good news. I sat across from Gary in his home office, my mother standing just behind him, and he told me, in the same tone he used to discuss quarterly projections, that the family could no longer fund both my tuition and Derek's accelerated MBA program at Northwestern. He said Derek's career trajectory would benefit the whole family. He said these things without ever looking up from his desk. I asked him about the promise he had made when he married my mother. He said circumstances change. My mother looked at the floor. I moved to Chicago with $1,800, a rolling suitcase, and the quiet knowledge that I was entirely on my own. My first apartment was a studio in Pilsen, above a dry cleaner that steamed the hallway every morning. I ate peanut butter toast for dinner more nights than I want to count. I took an entry-level admin job at a small freight brokerage on the west side. The owner, a blunt woman named Sandra Park, noticed within 3 months that I was absorbing everything around me. She gave me more responsibility. I took every free online course I could find: supply chain systems, operations management, contract logistics. I built my knowledge the way you build a wall, one brick at a time. In the dark, 4 years later, I launched my own consulting firm out of a co-working space in River North. I called it Lantern Logistics. I kept my name off every public-facing document. No LinkedIn, no press releases, no interviews. My lawyer handled all contracts. My operations director signed everything client-facing. I stayed invisible on purpose because I knew what happened when people like Gary found out you were succeeding. They either tried to take credit or they tried to take you down. Then my grandmother Ruth passed away. I flew back to Naperville for the funeral, sat in the back of the church, and watched Gary deliver a eulogy about what a remarkable woman she was. The irony sat in my chest like a stone. 3 days after the funeral, I got a call from an estate attorney named Margaret Holloway, based in downtown Chicago. She told me that my grandmother had established a private trust in my name 7 years earlier, with specific instructions that no other family member be informed. The trust contained $640,000. Ruth had also left a letter. Margaret read it to me over the phone, in a voice that stayed steady even when mine could not. My grandmother wrote that she knew what Gary had done with my college fund, that she had confronted my mother about it and been dismissed, and that she had spent years quietly making sure I would have something he could never touch. She wrote, You were never the problem, Claire. You were always the point. I used part of that money to grow Lantern Logistics. The rest I held in reserve. Within 2 years, we had 11 employees and $3.2 million in annual revenue. We specialized in freight optimization and carrier network consulting, helping mid-sized companies stop bleeding money on inefficient shipping routes. And here is the part that is almost too strange to say out loud. One of our largest clients was Hargrove Logistics, the company Gary had built and was preparing to hand over to Derek. They had signed a 4-year service contract with Lantern. We had redesigned their entire carrier network. Gary had mentioned us by name at 2 industry conferences, calling us a game-changing partner. He had never met me. All communications went through my team. All contracts were signed by my operations director. The man who told me I had no future had been standing on my work for 4 years without knowing it. Then came the retirement dinner. The invitation arrived on cream cardstock, gold lettering, Gary Hargrove requesting the pleasure of your company. I almost recycled it, but something in me needed to go, not for reconciliation. I had made peace with the fact that these people would never change. I went because I knew Gary, and I knew that given a microphone and an audience, he would eventually show me exactly who he was. I wanted to be there when he did. The Hargrove retirement dinner was held at a private room in one of the oldest steakhouses in downtown Chicago. Exposed brick, low lighting, 60 guests who all knew each other and all knew their place in the room. I wore a deep navy dress I had bought myself and my grandmother's pearl bracelet. I was seated at the far end of the room, near the kitchen, next to people I had never met. Derek found me before the appetizers arrived. He had the look of a man who had been handed everything and was still somehow convinced he had earned it. He told me he had heard I was doing something in logistics and laughed in a way that was not quite a laugh. He told me the industry was brutal and that it helped to have real connections. He said this while adjusting the cufflinks our stepfather had given him. Gary's speech came after the main course. He thanked his partners, his board, his golf buddies. He thanked Derek extensively, called him the future of everything he had built. And then he turned his eyes to the end of the room and smiled the way a cat smiles before it opens its mouth. "And then there's my stepdaughter, Claire," he said, his voice light and easy. "No degree, no direction, just a talent for showing up to things she wasn't really part of." The room laughed. Not everyone, but enough. We love her anyway. Some people take longer to find their path. Claire's still looking. More laughter. Gary winked at someone near the front like they were sharing a private joke at my expense in front of 60 people. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I picked up my glass, stood up slowly, and waited for the laughter to stop. When it did, I said clearly and calmly, "Thank you, Gary, for everything." I set the glass down without drinking. Then I picked up my bag and walked out of that restaurant. The room was completely silent by the time I reached the door. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to stop and ask you something. If this story is hitting close to home, if you have ever sat at a table where someone who was supposed to love you made you the joke, drop a comment and tell me you are here. You do not have to share your whole story. Just let me know I am not alone in this. And if you want to know how this ends, because I promise the ending is not what anyone in that room expected, subscribe and hit the bell right now. What happened to Hargrove Logistics in the weeks that followed is something I never planned and never wanted. But it happened, and it changed everything. My operations director sent the contract non-renewal notice the following Monday. 30 days written notice, standard terms, no drama. I also sent Gary a personal letter. 1 page. I told him that the consulting firm he had called transformative at 2 industry conferences was mine. I told him about my grandmother's trust. I told him that for 4 years the daughter he described as still searching had been the backbone of his company's operational savings. I did not threaten him. I just told him the truth. The calls started before noon. I did not answer any of them. When Hargrove Logistics lost the Lantern contract, the operational gaps hit fast. Rerouting costs spiked. 2 major carrier agreements lapsed because nobody on their internal team had the relationships we had built. Derek, 3 months into the CEO role, was fielding board questions he had no answers to. Gary came out of retirement to help and found that the ground he had been standing on had quietly belonged to someone else. Word moved through Chicago's logistics community the way it always does, quietly and completely. People who had watched Gary laugh at his stepdaughter at a public dinner were now watching his company absorb a loss they could not explain without telling the truth. Nobody wanted to tell the truth, but everybody eventually heard it. I found out through a former colleague that Gary stopped attending the industry association dinners he had gone to monthly for 15 years. That the table where he used to hold court was now just an empty chair. I did not feel victorious, I want to be honest about that. I felt something quieter and harder to name. I felt like a door had finally closed on a room I had been standing in my whole life, cold and drafty and never quite mine. I started seeing a therapist in Lincoln Park 6 months later. Best decision I have ever made. I reconnected with my uncle on my mother's side, who told me things about my mother's original intentions, things Gary had buried that I am still learning to carry. I kept the photo of my grandmother on my desk. I visited her grave and told her what happened. The wind came through the trees, and I decided to take that as an answer. Lantern Logistics now has 17 employees. We moved to a new office in the West Loop with windows that face the skyline. I wear what I want, drive what I earned, and answer to nobody but myself and the people who depend on me. If you are the one your family wrote off, if you are building something in silence, because silence is the only safe place you have, keep going. The work is the answer. Not revenge, not confrontation. Just the slow, patient, undeniable truth of what you build when nobody is watching. My stepfather stood at a microphone and told 60 people I was nothing. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that I had already been building the proof that he was wrong. I just had not shown it to anyone yet. Until now.